Previously on the Beam Chronicles.
Bring Tyler Foone back to HQ, and for the time being, he will be contained.
Howie, I really don't think this is such a good idea.
It is decided, Murph.
Papa Kavorsky would be the least of our problems if that happened. Big Purple's still down there.
I could kill Big Purple. See, Kavorsky had hordes of genetically modified gremlin subhumans on hand to defend their master. Every one of them recoiled in fear when Kavorsky went to unleash Big Purple. And he had these weird, metallic-looking cuff things on his forearms that nobody had any ideas about. If it ain't broke, for the love of God, don't break it, and release the wrath of the long-sleeping Purple Titan. I noticed Big Purple watching Jaxon and me interact, just the faintest hint of sadness in his eerie yellow eyes.
We're not gonna see eye to eye on this. I can't do it your way.
You're not unique, Jaxon. You're just the loudest and the fucking stupidest. You're not even the first. The only reason your hands are so clean is because mine are twice as bloody.
These are the Beam Chronicles with your host, MJ Dooney. Book 1, Initiation, Chapter 12, Jaxon Teaque.
One year for Christmas, there was some toy, and it was the toy that year, you know? And for the life of me, I can't remember the name of it. Some action figure robot thing that had actual lasers and could get you a pop out of the fridge, at least according to the commercials. Anyway, I wanted it, and a lot. It was pretty much all I talked about that year, and my mom, single mom at Christmas and all, she really wanted to get it for me. But it was way outside of the budget. She couldn't help it though, so she did little things to wiggle enough cash free. She dipped into savings, maybe took an extra shift or two, bought an off-brand of canned spaghetti, that sort of thing. And this was right around the time when people first started sleeping in tents outside of stores when they wanted something that badly. So my mom called the babysitter and went to this place the night before, slept there in the cold, fought the crowds to get this stupid thing for me. She had a black eye in the struggle. Some jackass tipped into her to get cuts in line. And when she finally got it, handed it to me on Christmas, and I opened it up, I was so disappointed. She got me the red one, and I wanted the green one. If I could go back in time, I would slap that spoiled little brat for crying on Christmas for all the pain he caused my mother, but at least he had an excuse. He was just a dumb, egotistical kid. What I had inadvertently done to Charlie in the last few months was sort of like that, but then sort of so much worse. After all she'd been through, all the history I never could have guessed, she'd given me the most beautiful gift I could ever ask for. She kept my hands clean. I was the equalizer who didn't equalize. And like a petulant little child, I'd been whining and slacking and pissing off Howie and jumping in front of guns for assholes like Tyler Foone because her gift wasn't good enough. It wasn't what I wanted. It wasn't the green one. I hadn't killed anybody. In over 5 months at Beam, I hadn't killed a single person thanks to Charlie, and all I cared about was that I was associated. Worse yet, I judged her for it. I thought less of her, like she didn't understand me or had some inferior sense of right and wrong, when all she'd done since the moment I got there was protect me and save my life. In the field, yeah, 1,000 times. Mission 1, the clap, he would have shot me. Tyler had me too many times if it weren't for her guidance, and another 30 if not for her training, not to mention she'd saved me from Howie's wrath at the end. She even introduced me to Maria, which undoubtedly saved my sanity while I was in evals. Everything good I had was somehow because of Charlie. Hell, since Charlie gave me Maria, she was indirectly responsible for the meager bit of retribution I got from saving the fly. I remembered how frustrating it was, insisting to him that he didn't know what he was up against, that his confidence was unfounded, and he couldn't fathom how wrong he was, and he'd ignore me and persist, contend, maintain things were one way when I knew they weren't, and he wouldn't just believe me that I knew better. I was the fly. I was Charlie's fly. Maybe that's why she was so interested in keeping me alive. Maybe I was just her redemption. Her bratty, ignorant, unrelenting redemption whom she kept securing, pulling me out of trouble only to have me jump right back in. I couldn't figure out a better explanation for why she was still trying. why she still cared about me at all. After all the time she saved my life, I told her I didn't even want it and derided her when I only knew half of the story. Hell, none of the story. Charlie had no reason to like me, no reason to forgive me after this, yet I knew she was going to. That was the worst part about it. I knew if she were actually done with me, she would have just grouped away on the beach. She never would have told me about her family, about Howie, about the eternal dark void of torment she suffered when she tried to resist him. She wouldn't have told me any of it if she weren't trying to wake me up and save my ass again. Why spill your most precious secret to someone you were done with? I knew we'd be partners again soon enough. What I didn't know is whether things would ever be the same. If I'd ever be able to look at her without remembering the way she looked at me on that beach, when I jumped onto the tracks while the train was coming for a worthless scumbag like Tyler Foone, and forced her to drag me off and then called her a callous murderer. So, I decided to go see him. If this was the one scar that never really faded for Charlie and me, and I gave it to us because of this son of a bitch, I just wanted to look at him. I wanted to see if there was anything about him that made it all worthwhile. There had to be something. Prophet cases were fate, controlled by destiny, unalterable by choice or motives. They can only end exactly the way they're supposed to end, and this one ended with Tyler alive and Charlie and I on the rocks. For some reason, I still believed fate couldn't be this cruel. There was some higher reason beyond my stupidity that Tyler wasn't equalized. There had to be. That, or else maybe I just wanted to subject myself to the punishment of thinking about the maniac I'd saved, knowing in a few days all would be forgiven when I didn't deserve it. Once before, a day or two ago, I'd been to his cell in the dungeon, but just to monitor a medical team hooking him up to the system for hydrating him, and that was while he was sedated. So many tubes and wires were plugged into his arms and legs and back, monitoring his life signs and supplying him with the precise slow drip of water he needed to narrowly cling to life. I wondered how he'd sleep, on which side he could lay so that he wasn't kinking one of them. From what I'd heard, he didn't sleep much, but maybe it was just because he was teetering on the brink of death. He'd been there a weekend so far, and had passed out seizing and dehydrated 3 times already, as Phil tried to calibrate the flow rate perfectly, strike up a balance between dying and, well, whatever you call what he was on the beach. In fairness to Phil, I got the impression that it was more of a lack of motivation than a lack of intelligence that made him continuously undercut the limit. Nobody really wanted to keep Tyler alive anymore except for Howie and, apparently, God. I'd been in the dungeon itself hundreds of times. It was Maria's favorite place to get work done. See, individual dungeon lockups were soundproof, some sort of ultra-strength synthetic material, tougher than steel, made of 3 sides and the floor and the ceiling, with only the wall facing the main hallway made of a foot-thick sheet of bulletproof glass. The only way someone within the cell could communicate with someone in the hallway was through a speaker system, and that required a mutual acceptance of the conversation, so the prisoners made no noise. Furthermore, our earpiece comms didn't work down there because it was a mile underground and we couldn't get a cell signal. If somebody wanted me while I was in the dungeons, they would have to walk or group down to find me there themselves. Essentially, the dungeon was perfectly noiseless, which made it ideal for concentration. Plus, it was incredibly exclusive. It was located in the lowest basement of Beam HQ and had heavily restricted access. 3 types of people could get into the dungeon: a department head, an equalizer, or in Maria's case, an agent with equalizer credentials serving indefinite penance and evals, or a dungeoneer. And even within these 3 categories, basically nobody came into the dungeons. Most dungeoneers weren't trained in combat, just observers, so they spent their day hiding in the safety of their bomb shelter type break room, off on the far end of the dungeon with its own private elevator, only contacting the higher-ups and more competence on the never-occurring occasion that somebody broke out. Most equalizers and department heads, meanwhile, were either too busy or too creeped out by its dark spookiness. Therefore, usually the dungeon was not only quiet, but a great place to be alone. Maria and I had used it more than a few times to hide when we wanted some privacy. Big Purple didn't even make me all that nervous anymore, but today, something was different about him. His cell was adjacent to Foone's, so I had to walk right in front of it to get to my destination. As I did, I could sense the monstrosity in my peripherals watching me. following me all the way down the length of his cubicle with his eyes. And I stopped momentarily to meet his gaze because it unsettled me so much. I'd seen him plenty of times, like I said, enough that the sight of him stopped making me feel uncomfortable. Still, in all of those times, whenever he'd opened his uncanny pink and yellow snake-slit eyes, they looked blank, emotionless, if anything, just a twinge of sad. Today he looked worried. Like he knew me, and my appearance here was something that caused him concern. I knew he couldn't move in the Kavorsky pod. I knew he was suspended, paralyzed in there, and some strange device covered his mouth. So, truly the only thing I had to judge his emotion was the eyes, and yet it was evident, as plain as could be, he didn't want me there. Then I heard a noise. Somewhere between a gasp and a cough. A noise. In the dungeon. Someone's cell was open. Oh God, I thought. Please don't let it be. I literally flew the 30 yards down the hall to Tyler's cell, and sure enough, the glass had been slid up. Presumably by the agent Foone was holding. One hand pressed against his chest, pinning him up on the wall, the other arm shoved down his throat to the elbow. And with each passing second, the agent would get more and more shriveled and desiccated like a raisin, while Tyler would get bluer and bluer.
Well, if it isn't me savior himself.
He sneered, discarding the dried-up husk of the agent he'd just drained into the corner of his cell, cavalierly.
This bloke offered me a drink. He didn't realize just how thirsty I was.
If I had to do it all again, I would have reacted much differently. I would have calmly swiped my ID in the keypad next to me and slammed the button to close the door, trapping him in there. It wouldn't do any good for whoever the man was he'd just grotesquely murdered, but surely he didn't have enough water absorbed to break our glass. He'd be trapped. Some Dungeoneers would probably get fired for slacking off, but all in all, the situation would have been handled. I wasn't that level-headed. I'd walked in on him drinking someone, brutally and inhumanely massacring a man, when my trip down here was to assure myself there was some justifiable purpose that I saved his life, in spite of all of the negative consequences that had so far come with it. This was the guy I chose over Charlie. I was furious, so I charged him like I was shot out of a cannon. Hard and fast enough that when I slammed him into the back of the cell, I knew he might even die, and I didn't care. But he was inciting me all along, and I'd fallen for it. Just before I hit him, he whipped his arms overhead as he crouched, creating a streamlined jet for me to hydroplane across, straight above him. I slowed down significantly before hitting the wall, enough to make sure I survived the impact, but I still hit it head first. It was only a bump, enough to blur my vision and disorient me for a second, not enough to knock me out. I stumbled to my feet and spun around, then Tyler fired a bullet of water, an orb the size of a baseball but pressurized and quick, straight into my chest, audibly breaking about 5 ribs. He jetted out of the cell, ran the card he'd swiped off the Raisin Man through the control panel, and hit the button to bring down the glass. I took a few seconds to keep myself together and conscious. It was a technique Phil and I had practiced a few times before during his research, this telekinetic internal stasis control. Essentially, I could sustain my consciousness in cases of severe trauma by taking oxygen into my brain and dulling the impulses sent through my nervous system. I could control the pain itself by holding the ribs in place firmly, as if they were never broken. I was barely decent at it, but it required a lot of concentration, and I'd never actually tried it with something more severe than a toe stub. It still hurt like hell, but I had it mostly in control. I was upright, at least. Couldn't just quit because I was injured. Tyler, who was the worst kind of winner and the worst kind of loser, was still standing behind the glass, laughing like a maniac, gesturing toward the telecom, insisting I walk over and push the button. I ignored him and tried using my earpiece to request help, but then remembered they didn't work down here. It was up to the Dungeoneers to report any suspicious activity to Murph. Why hadn't they done so already?
You can't break it.
I read his lips as he knocked on the glass, shaking his head in mock sympathy. He looked askance at the speaker again, already holding down the button on his end reluctantly. I hovered across the room, careful not to upset the balancing act of holding my ribs in place. When I got close enough, I glared at him for a second. He tipped his head toward the speaker one last time, and I jabbed my finger into the button.
So, mate, not so pleasant in there, is it?
I slammed his face into the glass wall before he finished, which involved dropping my ribs for a second and getting blasted with a wave of agony. Overall worth it, even as I watched his semi-liquid pale blue state absorb and heal off the injury from the blow.
Forgot you could do that.
He rubbed his head where the laceration was a second ago. Let me out, Tyler.
Nah, I don't think I will. Quit doing that. Look, I'll let you live, alright? Consider it repaying the favor for saving me from the dreadlock wench in the trench coat and boots, you know, the hot pieces. You realize it's not actually doing any damage to me, right?
He shouted when I'd finally stopped. It didn't matter. It was fun, and I could tell it still hurt the same. And I absolutely wasn't about to let him finish some off-color comment at Charlie's expense. Think this through, Foone. You got no exit strategy. How much water have you absorbed?
That bloke brought me about a litre, just to put on a show. Took another 30 out of him after that.
And used about half of it deflecting me, shooting me, and propelling yourself out of here. Yeah, the same 3 maneuvers left, one of each, against all the equalizers in the building. Not to mention my partner from the beach. You're outgunned, plain and simple. Let me out and...
By gum, you're right. Hadn't even considered it. Good advice, Jaxon, is it? Right, guess I got no choice but to open this door and...
He hesitated, holding the card at the top of the scanner, apparently considering something, although it was clearly all an act.
Oh wait, maybe... Now there's a thought.
He yanked back the card, started stroking his chin.
Suppose I made a friend who's the gnarliest looking cunt in this place.
Shit. I tried to grab him, but he slammed his fist into the control panel, mashing a button at random from those used to subdue an unruly anomaly. So I dropped him and he jetted off. I quickly snatched a bubble of air around me as much as I could as I correctly determined the button he'd pressed activated the poison gas jets. And in the process of catching and securing the clean air, the bad gas was yellow-green, so I guess probably chlorine, I dropped my ribs for a second, then I winced, lost some air, let go of my ribs again. Eventually I managed to get my equilibrium lined up. I had air to breathe, and I had my ribs held in place, but in the process, I completely lost Foone. I wish I could six him like Charlie, or that I hadn't let him go in the first place when I was ragdolling him up against the wall. I wish I hadn't tried to use logic on him without thinking it out for myself. Now my stupid big mouth had stuck me with a limited air supply and no way out, plus led Tyler straight to an accomplice, some other psychopath in here who could... Oh God, Big Purple. That's the direction he took off, and right toward Big Purple. There was no doubt who Foone would choose for his co-conspirator. No doubt the very first prisoner he saw would be the perfect one to spring. That's why Purple was watching me like that, and why he wanted me to leave. He knew it was his chance to get out. He knew that raisin idiot, for whatever reason, was gonna let Tyler go, and once Foone was free, Big Purple was as good as free too. And now, the only 2 men I'd ever seen Charlie show any fear toward were about to team up and break out of the dungeon. I was the only one who knew it. I was the only one who could stop them. And after however many minutes worth of air I'd captured ran out, I was going to die. The glass was the only exit, but it was monstrously thick and sturdy, shatterproof. I had the power to overcome it and may have had a shot at breaking it if I weren't both injured and holding a bubble of air. See, the most multi-directional, complex, and dynamic Jaxon fields were the highest energy. At least that's what Phil told me. Apparently that was part of the reason why it was incredibly challenging to focus on multiple telekinetic tasks at once. I could keep my bubble of air around me, or keep my dangling bones from making me pass out, or push against the wall designed to be unbreakable until it broke. But all 3 at once, it was a balancing act I was ill-equipped to handle. Something had to give. I knew if I had any chance, I had to release my ribs. So I took a few deep breaths and slowly let them fall down, breathing quicker and quicker with each moment of increasing pain. It was like those thrill rides at amusement parks that slowly raise you up higher and higher and eventually drop you, but on the ascent you just keep thinking that you've reached the maximum altitude and then it goes up more and more. That's how the pain felt as I let go. I kept thinking I'd hit the peak and then I'd find a bit more, but I didn't let it distract me more than it had to. I was Beam's only shot. Hell, maybe the world's, too. I was pushing against the wall with every bit of strength I could muster. Precious air leaking out of my grip, ribs so on fire I couldn't even catch my breath, sweat pouring off of my face, and teeth chattering as my head reeled, and I tried to stay awake in spite of the pain. The glass just stood there, taking the hit and not moving, like it was nothing, like I was just looking at it. I imagined Charlie's voice when I'd be lifting weights or skirmishing with her and she felt me holding back. "Come on, JT, dig deep," she'd say. "You got this, dig deep." I pushed harder, lost more air, started seeing lights flickering on the fringes of my vision. Come on. The glass started to make a noise, a low moan like it was moving. I was overcome with a wave of hope. And then the hope was gone. Big Purple was loose and in front of the cubicle. Something about seeing him move, walking around like an actual person and not just a terrifying statue or painting, was so unfathomably unsettling. Tyler was nowhere in sight. Why would he be? Big Purple didn't need a pointless, powerless, almost dry typhoon, slowing down his monstrous rampage of an escape. But why was he here? Why did he come back? Just to kill me? What significance was I to Big Purple? He scanned the key Foone had lifted off his victim, and as the glass slid open, the ventilation system powered on automatically, sucking the chlorine out of the room. Finally, I could release my pressure on the door and my hold on the air. I needed all the muscle I could get from what I'd heard about Dr. K's children. I made a mental note that if I survived this fight, I needed to start carrying some sort of pocket projectile to whip at people, or hell, even a gun like Charlie. Maybe I could talk Phil into developing me a signature weapon, because as things stood now, short of tossing him down the hall himself, the only offensive action I could take was throwing Tyler's cot at him. I thought it might be the same style of thing Foone had just done to me, piss him off so that he charged, deflect, run, slam the door. I was in too much shock and too much pain to come up with something better that quickly, so I hoisted the bed into the air and began whacking him with it like a baseball bat.
Ow, 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 ow.
With each strike by the cot, he'd repeat his monosyllabic objection, the same astounded inflection every time. I realized that what I was doing couldn't possibly be hurting him. I wasn't even intending it to, so I surmised that he was perhaps just surprised. Was he not expecting an attack? He shot me a look of skeptical mistrust once I had stopped knocking him with the cot and left it suspended above his head. Then he pressed one of the strange golden cuffs that he wore around his wrists against the side of his thigh and lifted it briskly, like he was striking a match, rolling it in a circle with an audible, crackling whir. He pointed a fist at the cot, and from the cylindrical wristband fired a purplish, goopy liquid. When this stuff hit the bed, it immediately began dissolving into thin air, corroding away, which took me by such surprise, I dropped what remained of it onto his head once more.
Ow.
Again, without variance from how he'd said it the first 4 times.
Please do not do that. I do not understand why you are doing that.
What in the world? You can talk?
I have punched the blue one in the head for you. I did not punch him hard enough for it to be fatal, though. Do you want me to put him back in here?
I blinked at him, bewildered and flummoxed. You can talk.
Yes, I can. I am sorry that I did not answer your question before. I thought it was obvious. Answering your question would be in itself the answer to your question. But about the blue one.
His voice was deep and soft. It kind of reminded me of a late-night jazz radio DJ host, only a little more broken, artificial, lacking the fundamental ability to construct a contraction. It was forced, like he'd heard about conversation before, but never had really tried it. For some reason, I'd never considered that he could speak, but even if I had, I wouldn't have expected Big Purple to be so polite. Wait, could you maybe tell me what happened just now? I was stuck in here trying to break this glass, so I feel like I'm missing some key components to this story.
The blue one came down to my cell and opened it. He released me from my capsule and requested that I help him to escape. As I have already established, I then punched him in the skull. He is now unconscious, but he is alive. I am again repeating information. Then I came to you and you struck me repeatedly with a mattress. Why did you do that?
Sorry about that.
It is all right. I assumed you were remorseful, but why did you do it?
I thought you were dangerous. I thought you were gonna kill me.
Ah, you were half right. I am very dangerous, but I do not want to kill you. Furthermore, I do not understand what sort of a dangerous man would be thwarted by a mattress attack. If I were going to kill you, that would not have prevented me.
I couldn't help it. The very sight of Big Purple out of his cage had made me so terrified I could only muster up the composure to beat him with a mattress. Considering the amount of bad stuff that had been happening both to me and because of me, it was just funny. In all the times I'd seen him, I'd come up with a pretty detailed mental picture of the kind of savage, unrelenting beast Big Purple would be unbound. This bizarre character was the farthest thing possible from what I'd imagined. And as I laughed, he slowly broke out a broad, shark-toothed grin.
Was that funny? I had not intended to make a joke, but I have found that my jokes are the funniest when I did not intend to make them in the first place. Ha 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 ha.
He threw his head back when he laughed, all disjointed and staccato, literally saying ha every time. This only made the situation more hilarious.
Ha 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 ha. Ha 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 ha. Ha 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 ha.
But the comedy quickly ceased. Charlie had grouped behind Big Purple and in her standard shoot-first fashion fired 3 shots at him in various lethal locations.
Ow.
He fell to his knees and lifted his arms, placing his hands on his head, largely unwounded by the bullets but certainly startled. Out of instinct, I flew over top of him and placed myself between Charlie's gun and Big Purple.
You've picked a really interesting time in our relationship to stand in front of Guillermo, Jaxon.
My timing's been way off lately. I winced, having forgotten to hold my broken ribs for a few seconds and registering the pain that went with that.
Move.
I hated myself. 2 days after she told me to pick my battles, 2 days after I realized how selfish I was standing in front of her gun at every turn, I was doing it all over again. I considered stepping aside, sacrificing Big Purple, cool as he seemed to be, to prove to Charlie that I'd registered her point. I so desperately wanted to let her equalize and stop her from equalizing, paradoxically at the same time. Charlie, listen, please, She tossed Guillermo into the air, clenched him in her fist, and decked me across the face. And I crashed into the wall of the block. Maybe this was better. To satisfy my stupid, guilty conscience, I didn't give up Big Purple willingly. But I wasn't going to get back up and fight for him again. As a demonstration to Charlie more than anything, I hated it, but I loved her too much to keep tormenting her, to keep being her fly. Plus, I think it was a good bit of catharsis for both of us. There was a lot of mustard on that punch. I think she'd been charging it up for quite some time.
It will not work.
Big Purple was still on his knees with his hands on top of his head as Charlie stepped toward him and pointed Guillermo at the back of it.
I am bulletproof.
She shot me a baffled look, and I grimaced dryly in a tried to tell ya sort of way. She looked back at Big Purple, the assertion in her gunpoint just slightly less emphatic.
I have ways of making bullets go where I want them. Besides, I'm pretty close range now, Big Purple. Nobody's that bulletproof.
Sydney,
What?
you called me Big Purple, but that is not what I am called. My name is Sidney Kavorsky.
He glanced over his shoulder, subtly smiling.
And what is yours?
Charlie.
She replied with an air of surprise at herself that she'd even answered.
Charlie Shade.
I have waited a very long time to learn this name. It is good to finally meet you in person, Charlie. I remember you from the day you apprehended my father. You are quite the warrior.
For a second, it looked like she was going to back down. Her eyes widened, mouth fell open, and Guillermo drooped even more. But she quickly reset him, shaking her head to discard whatever memories he'd brought up.
Yeah, well, I've heard you're not so bad yourself, so what's with the hands on the head submitting to arrest thing?
It is as I told your friend, the one that you have punched. I have no desire to fight you.
So, what do you want then?
It is my sincerest wish to join you. Allow my submissiveness and my dispatching of the blue one to be evidence of my sincerity.
You want to join Beam
Yes,
after we killed your whole family?
yes.
Why?
I wish to join precisely because you have killed my whole family. I have nothing else in the world that I love, nothing left to fight for. I fight well, but I have no purpose or reason. I am blank and wish to be something. Besides this, I cannot spend another minute living in a jar watching the world move around me, unable to move myself, and I am afraid to die. The only option left is for me to join Beam, and so that is what I wish to do.
I knew there were parts of that which rang truer with Charlie than he could have possibly understood. And only because I knew to look for it, I noticed her subtle hesitation.
We aren't exactly accepting applications right now.
I understand. Then I will return to my cell and wait until you are accepting applications.
And with that executive decision, Sydney stood up and walked down to his lockup. Charlie and I were stunned in place for a moment, then followed him into the hall just as he'd calmly arrived at his cell. He flung Tyler, still out cold, into the hallway like a useless piece of laundry cluttering up his room.
I cannot close the door from the inside.
He called down to us.
One of you must do that part.
All the while we were resealing Sydney in his block and carrying Tyler back to his, I was worrying about what Charlie was feeling, what she was thinking specifically toward me, and what in God's name I could say. On top of all the perfectly justified anger she probably was already harboring, I'd yet again tried to save an anomaly's life. I never learned my lesson. Surely her patience with me was well beyond expired and completely warranted in being so. I was expecting once we had everything pieced back together, she would just group away without saying a word, but bittersweetly, she treated me the same as always, like her best friend.
Well, that was unexpected, huh?
She said as soon as the glass door slammed shut on Foone's cell. Huh, yeah, I guess it kinda was.
You don't even know, JT. The gargoyles and freak shows we fought on that bust were pure insanity. We all almost died, like 12 times. And Big Purple, or apparently it's Sydney now. Fuck, he was supposed to be the scariest one, and he's such a sweetie. Like a big, articulate baby man.
Charlie, I'm sorry. I tried to stop you from equalizing him. I'm sorry I stepped in front of Guillermo like that. I really, really am.
Why? Sydney's a little awkward, strange as hell, but he seems like your bread and butter. Deeply misunderstood, gentle giant trapped in a disturbing purple monster body, don't judge a book sort of thing.
Yeah, but we just got into it over this, though, and I've been feeling like a complete sack of crap for everything that happened after the Foone case.
Good, you were a complete sack of crap for everything that happened after the Foone case.
Right? And then I just jump in front of another bullet for another anomaly instead of accepting all of the amazing things you've done for me and letting you do what you have to. I really did learn my lesson, Charlie. I really am going to stop being
Seriously, you just enjoy flaying yourself, don't you?
Huh?
You can't just be wrong and say sorry and move on with your life. You gotta beat a pound of flesh out of yourself and sacrifice it to me as tribute to your remorse. JT, I don't expect you to stop jumping in front of guns for people. Hell, I don't even want you to stop jumping in front of guns for people. That's just part of who you are, and if you weren't you, I wouldn't like you, and I wouldn't care about saving you anyway. It gets a little annoying, yeah, but don't change it. That wasn't the point. The point is, I don't want you to do it for every single asshole, all while brandishing your dick at Howie and chastising me for not understanding you like you're some sort of immune and tortured mystery. It was never about the heroics, it was about the stupidity and the arrogance.
Oh. Well then, why'd you punch me?
Because I thought you were being stupid and arrogant. It was fucking Big Purple. I thought he was gonna massacre you. Besides, I punch everybody that I like. That's how I show affection.
I didn't deserve her affection. But for some reason I had it. Maybe it was time to stop digging so hard for deeper meaning and accept the gifts I'd been given, even when they were red and I wanted green. I nose-laughed and my diaphragm pushed against my ribs, which I had almost instinctually been holding in place. Charlie noticed my wincing.
You know you got 5 or 6 ribs just dangling there, right?
Yeah, I'm trying to keep them in place, but I keep dropping them. That was Tyler's doing.
You didn't let him out, did you? because then I'll be mad at you again.
That wasn't me. I came down here to clear my head and get some perspective. When I got to Tyler's cell, it was open and he was, drinking someone.
Drinking him?
Like, sucking all the water out of his body.
Ew?
Yeah, so that guy must have let him out. Foone mentioned he brought some water to put on a show or something, and then Tyler sucked him dry for it.
Idiot. Any idea who it was?
No, his body's in the corner over there in Foone's block, but it's all...
Beef jerky, right?
I shook my head, snickering in spite of myself at her crassness, then had a light bulb. Oh wait, Foone was using his keycard, a beef jerky guy, to lock me up, then unlock Sydney. Then Sydney let me out, so he must still have it. We made our way down the hall, back to Sydney's cell, in which he was patiently sitting, cross-legged on the floor. When he spotted us outside, he excitedly grinned a broad, sharky grin and waved. I pointed at the intercom, and he curiously made his way over to it, inspecting the button from several angles before finally depressing it, as I had. Sydney, can you hear me?
Ah, yes, I can. Are you now accepting applications?
Sid, no. It's been 5 seconds.
Charlie spoke with a good-natured mock exasperation. I could tell she liked him already.
Charlie. My father called me Sid. How did you know this? Oh, also, that reminds me, the male one. The one that is not Charlie. What are you called?
Oh, right. Sorry. I'm Jaxon Teaque.
It is good to make your acquaintance, Jaxon.
Likewise. Look, Sid.
I am sorry, moments ago, I was Big Purple, whom you struck with a bed because you thought me to be dangerous, and now I am Sid. We are becoming fast friends, Jaxon Teaque, Charlie Shade, and Sidney Kavorsky.
Charlie sighed, closed her eyes, and shook her head. I persisted with the reason I'd come here in the first place. Sid, you know the card you used to open the block I was stuck in?
I do.
Did you take that off of the blue guy?
I did.
And do you still have it?
Yes, it is in my pocket.
May we see it?
Of course, friends.
He pressed it up against the glass, and Charlie and I leaned in to read the name on it.
Vasquez. Hey, I was right. He was an idiot.
Charlie, Vasquez has been here for like a decade.
Squad 2.
Why would he want to bust Tyler loose? And where were the Dungeoneers in all of this? And what the heck do we do with Sydney? We can't just leave him in there. He had returned to his position, sitting cross-legged on the floor, next to the now wide-open K-pod, patiently waiting for the hiring process to begin.
Beats me on all 3 questions. This is kind of outside of our job description. Better take it to the higher-ups, right? I'll stay here and watch Sydney and Foone make sure no more monkey business happens. You go get Murphy and Howie.
Profit too? I mean, I know I should start deferring to you on all things Howie. You have a much better grasp on how he operates, but shouldn't we at least try to figure out a game plan before we bring him in?
He'd find out anyway. Assume we were keeping secrets, get pissy, start tossing people out of windows.
Charlie, what's he gonna do to Sydney? She looked over her shoulder at him, still unmoving, still harmless.
I don't know. Howie can be unpredictable sometimes. He just let Foone live. Maybe there's a chance for him. If not, well, just let me worry about that, JT.
This time, for Charlie's sake, I actually intended to.
Thank you for listening to this episode of The Beam Chronicles, a fiction podcast written and produced by me, MJ Dooney. I would be extremely pleased and grateful if you could throw me a rating on Apple Podcasts or Spotify or wherever you're hearing this. I'm seeing really nice steady growth as far as listeners go, and I love it so much. But if you have someone in your life who might appreciate the story I'm telling, please share the word. I'm still really small doing this solo, so any positive word of mouth is great. I'm so curious about who's listening to this, so if you want to shoot me an email with some constructive criticism or encouragement or just to say hi, beamchronicles@gmail.com. I would be ecstatic to hear some feedback. Also, if you like what you hear or want to get updates, you can follow me on Twitter @BeamChronicles or TikTok, same handle. I've also been posting episodes to YouTube. If you want to like, follow, subscribe there. I still have no idea what to do with Instagram, but follow me there too, I guess. All music and sound effects were sourced through the Epidemic Sound Library. Special thanks to Sergio Duarte for creating the cover art for this podcast. You can find him on Instagram. Thanks again for listening.